Imagine stepping into a world completely unknown, a vast, uncharted wilderness stretching for thousands of miles. This isn't a fantasy novel. This was the reality for Meriwether Lewis and William Clark in 1804. Their mission, handed down by President Thomas Jefferson himself, was to explore the newly acquired Louisiana Purchase, a massive territory that had just doubled the size of the United States. But this was more than just a mapping expedition. It was a journey into the heart of a continent, a quest for a fabled water route to the Pacific Ocean, and a bold first step in asserting American presence in the West. The story usually starts with these two famous names, Lewis and Clark. Lewis was Jefferson's personal secretary, a man of intellect and scientific curiosity, but also prone to deep melancholy. Clark was his counterpart, a rugged frontiersman, a skilled navigator, and a natural leader. Together, they were the perfect duo to lead the cause of discovery, a hand-picked team of soldiers, volunteers, and woodsmen. But the team was far more diverse than we often remember. There was York, Clark's enslaved African American, whose very presence fascinated and sometimes frightened the Native American tribes they encountered. His strength and skills were invaluable, yet his story is a complex one of service without freedom. And then there was Sacagawea. Let's be clear, she didn't guide them in the traditional sense. She was a young Shoshone woman, barely a teenager, who had been kidnapped by a rival tribe and was then married to a French-Canadian fur trader, Toussaint Charbonneau, who was hired by the expedition. She joined the cause with her infant son, Jean-Baptiste, strapped to her back. Her true value wasn't as a navigator of the entire continent, but as a crucial diplomat and a symbol of peace. A war party doesn't travel with a woman and a baby. Her presence signaled to the native tribes that this was a peaceful mission. She also helped identify edible plants, and her language skills were vital, especially when they reached her own people, the Shoshone. It was a stroke of incredible luck that the Shoshone chief they desperately needed horses from turned out to be her long-lost brother. Without that reunion, the expedition might have ended right there, stranded at the foot of the impassable Rocky Mountains. Their journey began by pushing upstream against the powerful current of the Missouri River. Their vessel was a 55-foot keelboat, a cumbersome craft that had to be poled, pushed, and sometimes dragged by hand. It was back-breaking, grueling work. The men were plagued by mosquitoes, boiled in the summer heat, and faced the constant threat of their boat capsizing. They were entering a land teeming with wildlife unlike anything they had seen before. Vast herds of bison that stretched to the horizon, grizzly bears that were far more ferocious and difficult to kill than the black bears they knew back east, and countless species of plants and animals they meticulously documented for science. Louise, the trained naturalist, filled his journals with detailed drawings and descriptions of everything from prairie dogs to pronghorn antelope. The first winter was spent in what is now North Dakota, among the Mandan and Hidatsa tribes. It was here they built Fort Mandan and, crucially, hired Charbonneau and Sacagawea. This winter was a period of diplomacy, trade, and learning. They gathered vital information about the geography that lay ahead, the formidable Rocky Mountains that loomed in their imagination. When spring arrived, they sent the keelboat back downriver with a shipment of specimens, reports, and letters for President Jefferson. The rest of the cause, now in smaller canoes, continued west into truly unknown territory. The easy part, if you could call it that, was over. Now, they faced the Rockies. They had hoped to find a simple river passage, but the reality was a towering snow-capped wall of rock. The Missouri River's headwaters splintered into a confusing maze of forks. Choosing the wrong path could mean disaster, trapping them in the mountains as winter approached. It was here that Clark's surveying skills and Lewis's careful judgment were put to the ultimate test. After the fateful reunion with Sacagawea's tribe and securing the horses they desperately needed, they began the most harrowing part of the entire journey, the crossing of the Bitterroot Mountains. They followed a treacherous trail, battered by an early snowstorm. Food ran out. They were forced to eat their horses, then candles, and even boiled their leather moccasins for any ounce of sustenance. They were starving, freezing, and on the brink of collapse. It was the Nez Perce tribe who saved them, offering food and shelter, nursing the cause back to health. It is a moment that highlights a recurring theme of the expedition. Their survival often depended on the knowledge and generosity of the Native American peoples they met. Finally, After descending from the mountains, they built new canoes and navigated the Clearwater, Snake, and Columbia rivers. The landscape changed dramatically from mountains to a vast, dry plateau. They marveled at the Great Cellulo Falls, a vital fishing and trading hub for tribes across the region. And then, one rainy day in November 1805, William Clark wrote in his journal the immortal words, "Ocean in view." Oh, the joy they had made it! They had reached the Pacific Ocean. But their journey was only half over. They spent a miserable, rainy winter at Fort Clatsop, a small stockade they built near the Oregon coast. Constantly damp and short on supplies, they prepared for the long trip home. In an extraordinary democratic moment, they all voted on where to build their winter camp, including York and Sacagawea. It was a landmark event, an unprecedented instance of an enslaved man and a Native American woman being given a vote in American history. The return journey in 1806 was faster, but no less dangerous. To speed up their exploration, Lewis and Clark decided to split up after crossing the Rockies. This was a massive gamble. Lewis's group headed north, exploring the Marias River, which led to the expedition's only violent conflict with a Native American tribe, the Blackfeet, resulting in the deaths of 2 warriors. Lewis himself was nearly killed, not by a warrior, but by one of his own men, who mistook him for an elk in the brush and shot him through the thigh. It was a serious wound that would trouble him for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Clark's group explored the Yellowstone River. The 2 parties miraculously reunited on the Missouri River and journeyed home together. When they finally arrived in St. Louis in September 1806, they were greeted as heroes. They had been gone for over 2 years and were presumed dead. They had traveled over 8,000 miles, documented hundreds of new species, mapped a route to the Pacific, and established American claims to the West. But the happily ever after ending is a myth. The journey took a heavy toll. Meriwether, Lewis, who was made governor of the Louisiana Territory, struggled to complete his official reports. He fell into debt, and his old melancholy returned, deeper than ever. Just 3 years after his triumphant return, he died from gunshot wounds at a remote Whether it was suicide or murder remains a mystery to this day. William Clark fared better, serving as a governor and superintendent of Indian Affairs, but his later career was complicated, as he oversaw the very policies that would lead to the removal of the tribes who had once helped him survive. Sacagawea's fate is also debated. Some say she died just a few years after the expedition, while oral traditions suggest she lived to be an old woman. The Lewis and Clark expedition wasn't just a simple adventure story. It was a complex, world-changing event. It was a triumph of endurance and a scientific achievement, but it also marked the beginning of the end for the way of life that had existed in the American West for thousands of years. It's a story of courage, of cultural encounters, of immense hardship, and of a legacy that is both inspiring and deeply complicated. It truly was the journey that made America. Thanks for watching. If you're fascinated by the hidden stories of history, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. See you next time.